Widow cat Pekoe swapped from ignoring me for years to treating me like his long-lost soulmate after his real person pa said. In 2020, I took the big leap and moved in with my then girlfriend, who is now my wife. Along with the new chapter in my life came a swirling blend of our combined pet worlds. I arrived with Gemma, my sweet and scruffy dog, while she brought along 2 cats, Indy and Pekoe. I genuinely believed our furry companions would quickly become a quirky, heartwarming blended family, maybe even something straight out of a Pixar montage. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Gemma, my dog, was the softest-hearted, gentlest old mutt you could ever meet. Every inch of her seemed to say she'd seen the bad days, but all she wanted now was a gentle chest rub and a soft spot to nap. Her fondness for cats bordered on worship. It was almost as though she wished the cats were her pets. I would watch her carefully lie down near them, always hopeful, almost pleading for them to love her even a fraction as much as she adored them. She hardly ever barked. She didn't demand snuggles, just proximity, with her eyes brimming with first day of school vulnerability, like a shy kid holding out a juice box, desperate for someone to be her friend. Indy, on the other hand, was a force. She was a calico tabby with the emotional volatility of live dynamite, sheer chaos in feline form. From the moment we moved in, she hated everything: the house, Gemma, change itself, excluding only my wife and, shockingly, eventually me. For the entire first year, she refused to set paw on the first floor. When she did finally warm up a little to my presence, Gemma still remained enemy number 1 in her book. Even after she began hanging out downstairs, Indy would traverse windowsills and furniture like a little fluff-coated ninja, deftly avoiding any territory Gemma might have touched or breathed on. Poor Gemma had to abandon her best-case scenario dreams of feline friendship after getting swatted down one too many times, completely undeserved, of course. And then there was Pekoe, a feline defined by anxiety. He's a large orange tabby with the emotional constitution of a soggy loaf of bread, skittish, needy, and so thoroughly uninterested in me that he acted like I barely existed. The only thing this sad, soft boy lived for was my wife. He barely tolerated Gemma and flat-out hated cuddles, except from his chosen human. If my wife dared close her office door, he would unleash operatic wails worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. He'd gaze at me with pointed suspicion, as if I were the man his wife had told him not to worry about. We came to an agreement: I existed, he pretended I didn't. For years, this was the state of our household. Gemma, ever the hopeful diplomat, just wanted to coexist peacefully, steadily trying to win over the cats. Indy radiated sheer malice or, on rare weeks, begrudging affection. She might sleep on my head, making herself comfortable atop her enemy-turned-tolerated roommate. Pekoe ignored me with impressive dedication. It was an uneasy truce, but it worked for us. Then, 2 years ago, Gemma passed away quietly at the impressive age of 16. We were devastated. Indy, who over time had turned her wild suspicion into an intense clinginess for me, suddenly decided I was now her primary person. She turned up her attachment to 11, howling when I left, draping her little gremlin body across my chest, back, head, wherever she could sprawl her anger-laced affection. But recently, Indy's health began to decline. Her heart murmur worsened, and about a month ago, my wife and I made the painfully gentle decision to say goodbye. At 17, she left us, and once again, we were absolutely gutted. And then, in the span of just a few days after Indy's passing, the dynamics of our house changed seemingly overnight. Pekoe, the sad, portly tabby who had expertly ignored me for 4 years, did a complete 180. Suddenly, I was the center of his world. I'd find him sleeping curled up against me at night, flipping over dramatically for belly rubs as if I were some expert cat masseuse. He spent all day in my home office, insisted on following me to bed and curling up beside me like I was the world's last patch of sunshine. He started wanting me to feed him, and now, he routinely ignores my wife, his long-standing favorite person, just so he can nudge my chair and demand attention. And then I'll see those wide eyes. He purrs as loudly and brokenly as a dying lawnmower, gazing at me with a sort of unwavering, adoring attention usually reserved for cult members or whoever has the tin opener. We changed nothing, no changes in routine, no changes to the house. My wife is still here, absolutely available for all his clingy affection. Yet Pekoe has redirected all that neediness onto me as if discovering his true soulmate after all these years and is determined to make up for lost time. Frankly, I'm completely at a loss. I've developed several theories to explain this seismic shift. Maybe Indy had been covertly bullying Pekoe into keeping his distance all along, and now, with her gone, he's finally free to pursue this forbidden human romance. Maybe Pekoe is grieving, and on some emotional level, he senses my grief, too. But it feels less like let's heal together and more like rub my belly, grief monkey. Or maybe, just maybe, this is an elaborate long con. Perhaps he's softening me up for something. He isn't exactly a master of being a cat, so I don't suspect murder, but something is definitely afoot. The transformation has been instant and absolute. It truly feels like I'm now living with a completely new animal. All the other factors in our lives are unchanged. My wife is still present, still his person, or so I thought. Now, it appears I have mysteriously taken on that role. I can't help wondering, is this just grief on his part? A glitch in the cat matrix? Has he only now realized how expert my belly scratches really are? Or was I marked for this all along? I don't have the answers. All I know is that now, I've got a big anxious tabby glued to my side, acting like we're soulmates destined to make up for all the years we missed together. And, honestly, even though he's hilariously bad at being a cat, I'm not complaining one bit. Update 1. Ever since Indy, our beloved cat, passed away, I found myself dwelling on something many people had hinted at, that she had claimed me as hers and had kept Pekoe, our other cat, away from me. Now, as the weeks have gone by, I'm beginning to think everyone was right, but maybe not in the way everyone expected. I think she was protecting me from him, perhaps, even for his own good. Am I exaggerating? Absolutely. It's not as if Pekoe can maintain a continuous, ceaseless meow 24 hours a day. He's a cat, after all. He sleeps 16 to 18 hours daily. He devours his food in mere seconds, wet pâté in an ornate, flower-shaped dish, several times throughout the day. But what he does possess is an unrelenting drive to meow incessantly, for minutes at a time, sometimes up to 15 drawn-out, torturous minutes. It's not a loud meow, oh, no, it's far worse. It is a psychic javelin being hurled through the center of my forehead. Like a skeletal finger scraping at the chalkboard inside my skull, each meow sends little tiny neural electric shocks deep into my brain. Over time, I've decoded some of his vocal assaults. I know their many purposes, though two things he decidedly never does with this particular skill stand out in stark contrast. But to explain those, I have to set the scene. My desk, my workspace, is quietly tucked into a cubby in our bedroom. Not far behind me looms the marital bed, now declared by Pekoe to be his throne, his royal domain. We even have a set of pet stairs at the foot of the bed. He's perfectly capable of using them, but Pekoe refuses on principle when I, the only acceptable, human-powered elevation device, am present. Not my wife, only I will do. Which brings me to his most recent, infuriating, and heart-melting behavior, his plaintive, relentless requests for my attention. It's a very specific form of attention, a ritual bypassing my wife entirely, something only I am permitted to perform. This is partially my own fault. From the beginning, Pekoe has never had much talent for being a cat. He's lazy and unmotivated. Mice, balls, strings, laser toys, nothing could rouse him. The highest I've ever seen him aspire is the back of the couch to reach an abandoned bowl of ice cream. We spoil him, and at nearly 17, there's no reversing course. His only purpose? To be a hedonistic loaf of fur. Even as I write this, Pekoe is pawing at the back of my chair, pressing me to perform my all-important duty, belly rubs. Not the casual variety, but a very specific routine. He wants me to grab him, firm, but gentle, press my head into his side, and flop him over. This began out of pure frustration during one particularly disruptive day. After being interrupted for the 7th time, I plopped him onto the bed and, with more annoyance than affection, gave him a belly rub, only to be startled by the resounding, satisfied purr that erupted in response. He purred for me, the way he once did for my wife during her rare moments of nighttime leniency, a purr I once believed was a smug, theatrical, dramatic declaration. See, fat man? She loves me more. Now, weeks later, I find myself compelled to repeat this ceremony again and again. Oddly, I am not allowed on the bed with him. Instead, I must stretch from my office chair, bending over awkwardly so he can bat at my shirt or, occasionally, attempt to groom my face. His preferences are specific: on his back, gripping my arm with his paws, or turned just to the side, kneading the air contentedly. Is it cute? Without a doubt. Is it disruptive and infuriating? Almost exclusively. It is gradually chiseling away at my already fragile sense of composure. Every meow drills deeper into my brain, carving crevices and pathways, as though tiny furry caterpillars are crawling through the tangled gray matter. And still, how can I be angry with him? How can I feel anything but affection for this ancient, purring machine, as I rub his belly, his aging vocal cords rumbling out a stuttering, laboring purr, like a lawn tractor struggling to come back to life after years of neglect, the choke fully pulled out. It's the kind of mechanical sputter only an old man in a worn flannel would understand. You gotta warm him up, can't just cold start him. Sometimes I try to stay sane by conversing with his ceaseless meowing. Sorry, I didn't catch that. No, it's not time for dinner yet, buddy. You wouldn't talk to your mother like that. It's not okay to use that kind of language in this house. Seriously, where did you learn that word? Because it wasn't from me. Is it helping? I'm not sure. My wife and mother-in-law find these exchanges hilarious, but for me, it is a last, desperate stand for the fragments of my sanity. I'm not winning. I am losing ground every day. He never ceases until he achieves his objective. My sense of autonomy, once sturdy and reliable, is now reduced to rubble. I no longer command my day, my time, or my destiny. My only options are endurance or surrender. No escape. I have no mouth, and I must meow. They say cats own us. I used to laugh at the idea, but now it feels horrifying, unavoidable, and all too real. I used to think Indy was the mastermind, terrorizing me, but now, I wonder, did she simply pass her authority on to Pekoe, like a crown? Is this orange monster my Joffrey? At times, I feel myself unraveling, and the conversations with my wife grow darker. Listen, I'm not sure, but I think he's asking for a more extravagant home, maybe somewhere better suited to his royal needs. Or maybe, he's telling me he's ready to strike it out on his own. Get a job, a place, start his own adventure. Or perhaps, just perhaps, he's interested in lake swimming. My wife does not find these jokes amusing, especially after hearing them so often, and has threatened severe consequences if I ever dare entertain them seriously. Am I tempted? Only in jest, I promise. I might be unraveling, I might be surrendering, but I am not a monster. I could never hurt him. I am gentle with every creature, and I love animals more than people. Honestly, it's just how I am built. Even this cat, yes, this cat, who relentlessly tests the boundaries of the love between us. I do love him. I do. I swear it, even right now, as he pushes me to the very edge of understanding. But I have to admit, I'm mostly just baffled, maybe a touch annoyed, but definitely mostly baffled. Let me explain. My cat has developed a peculiar ritual, something almost sacred in its bizarre repetition. Why does he insist on doing this? Is it mere play for him or some inscrutable humiliation ritual devised just for me, one I am not yet able to fathom? Every time I try to get back to my work, he'll wait a respectable few minutes, then begin to cry for me again, and when I finally return to him, what do I see? He has stood up again, as if nothing happened. Clearly, being knocked over is somehow an essential part of the whole affair. But why? Why is he so particular about this little game? What is the meaning behind it? What is this? I feel myself giving in, resigning to my absurd fate. I am now his personal elevator, rising and lowering at his command, distributing belly rubs like tributes to some noble king. And yet, I can't help myself. I do it, I always do it, finding an odd sort of mental endurance and emotional nourishment in each moment that he basks in my attention. When he wraps his paws around my arm, my heart just melts. When he kneads at my shirt, I lose myself a little. And then there are those air biscuits he makes, not the hurried kind, but the slow, deliberate, luxurious ones. Why are they so slow? So mesmerizing. And, against all logic, why do his slow air biscuits look so utterly delicious? Update 2. I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for weeks now. Something I discovered that changes everything I thought I knew about Pekoe's sudden obsession with me. And honestly, I'm not sure if I should laugh, cry, or question my entire marriage. It started 3 weeks ago when my wife had to leave town for a work conference. Nothing unusual, she travels maybe twice a year for her job. But this time, something felt different. Pekoe seemed agitated, more than his usual demanding self. The first night she was gone, instead of his typical evening belly rub routine, he did something completely unprecedented. He brought me something. I was working late when I heard that familiar meowing, but this time it was muffled. I turned around to find Pekoe standing on the bed with one of my wife's hair ties in his mouth. Not just any hair tie, but a specific black one she always keeps on her nightstand. He dropped it right in front of me and then did his dramatic flop maneuver, waiting for his belly rub. Weird, I thought. Maybe he misses her too. But then it happened again the next night. This time, it was a sock from her laundry basket. Then a pen from her side of the desk. Always something of hers, always delivered with that same expectant meow and flop routine. By the fourth night, I was starting to feel like I was living with a furry little detective. That's when I decided to follow him. I know how this sounds. I followed my cat. But I had to understand what was happening during the hours I wasn't paying attention to him. So one afternoon, I pretended to take a nap and kept one eye cracked open. What I witnessed was unsettling. Pekoe spent nearly an hour methodically visiting every spot in the house where my wife typically sits, sleeps, or works. He would sniff each location thoroughly, then sit there for several minutes, just waiting. Like he was expecting her to materialize. But here's the part that made my skin crawl. At each spot, he would meow, not his attention-seeking meow, but something softer, almost conversational. Like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. When my wife returned from her trip, I mentioned Pekoe's strange behavior. Her reaction was immediate and weird. She got very quiet, then quickly changed the subject to asking about work, but I caught something in her expression. Guilt? Nervousness? I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, I decided to test something. I casually mentioned how Pekoe had been bringing me her things while she was away. "Oh, that's just cats being cats," she said, not looking at me. "They do weird stuff when their routine changes." But then Pekoe did something that made my blood run cold. He walked into the bedroom, looked directly at my wife, and meowed once, that same soft, conversational meow I'd heard him use with the empty spaces. And she responded. Not with words, but with a subtle hand gesture, like a tiny wave, barely perceptible. The kind of gesture you'd use with someone you'd trained to understand your signals. They had a routine. A communication system. And I'd never noticed. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Really watching, and I began to see it, little interactions between them that seemed almost secretive. Times when she would quietly slip him treats when she thought I wasn't looking, using hand signals instead of verbal commands. Moments when he would follow specific patterns around the house that seemed too deliberate to be random. Then I found the notebook. I was looking for a phone charger in her nightstand drawer when I came across a small journal I'd never seen before. The entries were dated, going back almost 2 years, right around the time Gemma died. They were observations about Pekoe's behavior, written in my wife's careful handwriting. P still won't approach when H is in the room. Tried the treat method again. No success. P showed interest in H's coffee mug today. Progress? H mentioned P seemed less anxious this week. Phase 2? Phase 2? There were phases? I kept reading, my hands shaking slightly. Indy's condition worsening. Need to accelerate timeline. P needs to be ready. Post I. P responded immediately to redirection protocol. H completely unaware. Week 2, full attachment achieved. H believes it's grief related. Perfect. I sat there on our bedroom floor, holding this journal, trying to process what I was reading. My wife had been training Pekoe? Conditioning him to transfer his attachment to me? But why? That evening, I confronted her as gently as I could. Honey, I found your notebook about Pekoe. The color drained from her face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed and sat down heavily on the bed. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Figure what out? What is this? What have you been doing? I've been preparing him, she said quietly. And preparing you. For what? She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were filled with tears. I've been having some health issues. Issues I haven't told you about yet. And I needed to make sure Pekoe would have someone who loves him when I can't be here anymore. The room went silent except for the sound of Pekoe's purring from his spot on the bed, completely oblivious to the conversation that was reshaping everything I thought I knew about the last few months of my life. How long have you known? I asked. About 6 months. I go for more tests next week. I looked at Pekoe, now understanding his sudden devotion in a completely different light. He wasn't choosing me, he was being gradually, lovingly transferred to me by the person who loved us both most. And now I'm sitting here, 3 days later, watching him do his dramatic belly rub routine, knowing it's not just affection or grief or some mysterious cat behavior. It's love. Desperate, planned, sacrificial love. From both of them. I don't know what those test results are going to show, but I do know that I'm not angry about the deception. How could I be? I'm just heartbroken that she felt she had to prepare for goodbye without letting me help carry that weight. And I'm grateful, so incredibly grateful, that I get to love this ridiculous, demanding, air biscuit making orange monster, no matter what comes next. Even if he is still terrible at being a cat. Update 3. The test results came back clean. I know that should be the end of this story. Wife gets good news, cat remains obsessively attached, everyone lives happily ever after. But life, as I'm learning, has a twisted sense of humor. My wife's relief was immediate and overwhelming. We cried together on the couch while Pekoe, completely oblivious to the emotional weight of the moment, used the opportunity to claim both our laps simultaneously. For a brief, shining moment, everything felt perfect. The deception was forgiven, the fear was lifted, and we had our weird little family intact. But here's where things get complicated. 2 days after we got the good news, my wife did something that still makes my stomach churn. She tried to undo Pekoe's training. I woke up that Saturday morning to find her in the kitchen, armed with his favorite treats, trying to coax him away from where he'd been sleeping pressed against my side. She was using those same subtle hand signals I'd discovered, but in reverse, attempting to redirect his attention back to her. What are you doing? I asked, still groggy. I thought. Now that we know everything's okay, maybe we could get things back to normal. You know, the way they were before. The way they were before. When Pekoe barely acknowledged my existence. I watched her work for about 10 minutes, growing increasingly uncomfortable. Pekoe looked confused, glancing between us like he was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Stop. She looked up, surprised by the sharpness in my voice. Just stop. Please. We had our first real fight that afternoon. Not about her health scare, not about the months of deception, but about this, about her assumption that I'd want to go back to being invisible to him. I thought you found him annoying, she said, her voice tight with frustration. All those jokes about him being demanding, about your sanity slipping. That was me processing, I shot back. That was me figuring out how to love something that had never wanted my love before. Did you think I'd just give that up? The truth hit us both at the same time. I'd fallen for Pekoe just as completely as he'd been trained to fall for me. The attachment had become real, mutual, irreversible. But my wife wasn't ready to let go. Over the next week, I started noticing things, small things. She'd accidentally close herself in rooms with Pekoe, leaving me on the other side of the door. She'd schedule her work calls during his usual belly rub times, knowing he'd seek her out instead. She even moved his food dish back to her side of the kitchen counter. The worst part? It was working. Pekoe began to seem torn, spending his days moving anxiously between us, clearly distressed by the mixed signals. His meowing increased, not the demanding attention-seeking kind I'd grown accustomed to, but something more desperate, almost frantic. Then last Tuesday, something happened that changed everything. I came home from a particularly brutal day at work to find my wife sitting on the living room floor, sobbing. Pekoe was nowhere to be seen, which was unusual. He typically greeted me at the door these days like an orange torpedo. "He won't come to me," she whispered. "I've been trying all afternoon, and he won't come." I found him under our bed, pressed against the far wall, his eyes wide with what I can only describe as stress. When he saw me, he let out the most heartbreaking meow I'd ever heard, not a demand, but a plea. That's when I understood, she hadn't just trained him to love me. She'd broken something in his ability to trust her signals entirely. All the conflicting commands, the push and pull, the emotional manipulation, it had damaged him. I laid down on the bedroom floor and just waited. Eventually, he crept out and curled up against my chest, purring that stuttering, labored purr, but softer now, almost apologetic. "I think," I said carefully when my wife appeared in the doorway, "we need to talk." The conversation we had that night was unlike any we'd ever shared in 8 years of marriage. Raw, honest, and painful. She admitted that watching Pekoe choose me over her, really choose me, not just follow programming, had triggered something deeper than jealousy. It had forced her to confront the fact that love, even pet love, isn't something you can control or redistribute at will. "I felt like I was losing both of you," she said. "First to the possibility of death, then to each other." We agreed on new rules: no more training, no more manipulation, no more competing for Pekoe's attention. Whatever relationship each of us had with him would be allowed to develop naturally, without interference. It's been 3 weeks since that conversation, and I'm watching something beautiful unfold. Pekoe still seeks me out for his ridiculous belly rub rituals. That bond seems unshakable now. But he's also rediscovering his connection with my wife, on his own terms. Some mornings I'll find them curled up together in her office chair, and other evenings he'll choose her lap over mine for no apparent reason. He's learned to love us both, separately and completely. And we've learned to let him. The strangest part? I think this whole ordeal might have saved our marriage in ways we're just beginning to understand. We're talking more honestly now, sharing fears we'd never admitted before, and somehow a neurotic orange cat has become the bridge between our separate anxieties about loss and love and the terrifying unpredictability of being human. Though I have to admit, as I write this with Pekoe draped across my shoulders like a furry scarf, making air biscuits against the back of my neck while my wife laughs at us from across the room, I still have absolutely no idea what he's thinking most of the time. Some mysteries, I suppose, are meant to remain unsolved. Update 4. I wish I could say that after our heart-to-heart about Pekoe, my wife and I entered some kind of golden period of marital bliss. For a few weeks, it genuinely felt that way. We were communicating better than we had in years. Pekoe had settled into his dual loyalty routine, and I thought we'd weather the storm. Then I found the second notebook. I wasn't snooping this time, I swear. My wife had asked me to grab her reading glasses from her bedside drawer while she was in the shower. But when I pulled the drawer open, there it was, another small journal, identical to the first one, tucked behind a box of tissues. This one was newer. The entry started about 6 months ago, right around when she'd begun training Pekoe. But these weren't observations about cat behavior. They were about me. H worked late again tonight. 3rd time this week. Says it's the Morrison project, but found receipt in H's jacket pocket. Lunch at Café Luna, Tuesday. He said he ate at his desk. H's phone buzzed during dinner. He silenced it immediately and wouldn't make eye contact. I stood there in our bedroom, my hands trembling as I read entry after entry of my wife documenting my every move, analyzing my behavior like I was some kind of specimen. The health scare, the cat training, it was all connected to this. She'd been suspicious of me for months. The worst part? She wasn't entirely wrong to be. I need to backtrack here, because I haven't been completely honest with you, or with myself, really. About 3 months before all this started, something did happen. Not an affair, not even close, but something. There's a woman at work named Sarah who joined our team in January. She's smart, funny, and we clicked immediately on a professional level. We'd grab coffee between meetings, stay late working on projects, text about work stuff that sometimes drifted into personal territory. Innocent stuff, mostly. The kind of friendship that develops naturally in office environments, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't felt something more than professional camaraderie. Sarah is. She's the kind of person who makes you remember what it felt like to have butterflies. To feel interesting and interested. To laugh at things that aren't really that funny just because you enjoy the sound of someone's voice. I never acted on it. Never even acknowledged it to myself, really. But those late nights, those lunches, they weren't entirely about work, and some part of me knew that. Some part of my wife knew it too. Reading her surveillance notes felt like being punched in the stomach. Not because she'd caught me doing anything terrible, but because she'd caught me feeling something I hadn't even admitted I was feeling. Sarah called during dinner last night. H said it was about the quarterly report, but he smiled when he answered. He never smiles when I call him at work anymore. That one hit me like a truck, because it was probably true. When my wife got out of the shower, I was still sitting on the bed holding the notebook. She saw me and just deflated. "How long have you been reading that?" "Long enough," I said. How long have you been writing it? Since I noticed you changing, she said quietly. Since I started feeling like I was losing you to someone else. We talked for hours that night. Not fought, talked. Really talked, maybe for the first time in months. She told me about the knot of anxiety that had been growing in her chest every time I mentioned Sarah's name. About feeling invisible in my presence, like I was somewhere else even when I was sitting right next to her. I told her about the loneliness I'd been feeling in our marriage, even before Sarah. About how we'd fallen into this comfortable but distant routine where we functioned more like roommates than partners. About how Sarah had made me remember what it felt like to be truly engaged with another person. Are you having an affair? She asked directly. No, I said. But I think I might have been headed toward one without realizing it. The honesty was brutal and necessary. We agreed that I needed to set boundaries with Sarah immediately. No more coffee meetings, no more personal texts, no more staying late together. I also needed to be completely transparent about any future interactions with her. But here's where things get complicated, and why I'm questioning everything about the last few months, the health scare that prompted all the Pekoe training. It happened right around the time my wife's surveillance of me was reaching its peak. The timing seems too convenient now. 2 days ago, I did something I'm not proud of. I called the medical office where she said she'd been getting tests done. I claimed to be calling about insurance coverage for my wife's recent appointments. There were no appointments. No tests. No health scare. My wife had fabricated the entire thing. The cat training wasn't about preparing Pekoe for her potential death, it was about testing my loyalty. About seeing if I could form a deep emotional attachment to something other than her. About gauging whether I was still capable of the kind of love and attention she felt I'd been withholding. When I confronted her about this last night, she didn't deny it. I needed to know if you still had it in you, she said, tears streaming down her face. The version of you that cared about something completely, that showed up consistently, that put someone else's needs first. I hadn't seen that person in months. So you manipulated me? And used Pekoe as a test subject? I was desperate, she said. I thought I was losing you, and I didn't know how else to find out if there was anything left worth fighting for. I'm writing this from a hotel room downtown. I told her I needed some time to think, to process what feels like months of emotional manipulation disguised as various crises. Pekoe is with me. I couldn't bear to leave him in the middle of what's probably the most confusing period of his little cat life. He's curled up next to me on the hotel bed right now, purring his mechanical purr, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire relationship with me was manufactured as part of some elaborate marital loyalty test. Does that make his affection less real? Does it make mine? I don't know what happens next. I love my wife, but I don't know if I can trust her. She loves me, but apparently not enough to address our problems directly instead of through elaborate psychological experiments. And somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, I've ended up with a ridiculous orange cat who thinks I'm his entire world, and I think he might be right. At least with Pekoe, what you see is what you get. Pure, demanding, air biscuit making honesty. I could learn something from that.